anymore.
All right, and let us also include in the discussion Dr. Jameel Ahmed Khan, who's a former ambassador. Thank you very much for being a part of the debate and joining us for this session. Of course, what is going on in India with regards to Muslims and the minorities in India is nothing new. We've known about it and talked about it for quite some time now. And we've also seen that the courts in the past have also given out verdicts which are, of course, not just and are in line with the kind of ideologies that has been put forward by the BJP regime as well. However, when we talk about the kind of verdicts that come out, is this something that we cannot question, perhaps on an international level, or perhaps in the way that when we look at a person's faith or a belief system, how is it that the court gets to decide what is essential to someone's belief or not?
Well, the courts could have any excuse to give this kind of a verdict because prima facie there is no rhyme and reason, and there is no international law which can allow any country or any, for that matter, judicial system which passes on this kind of a judgment and a verdict, where the fundamental human right, where the blatant violation of the law of the land, which is India, where the blatant violation of the international laws, not one more than half a dozen laws, right? And I can quote those half a dozen laws which give protection to all such activities are against all such activities which the Supreme Court of India, the apex court of India, has today demonstrated. And my indication is the international laws are 1948, which is, of course, the Universal Declaration, Article 18, 1966, which is the covenant of the civil and political rights. Likewise, in 81, Declaration of Elimination of Intolerance. And like in 1986, there was establishment of there was a report of the United Nations, and they had mentioned about right of freedom, religious freedom, and there were two more laws in it. I would not like to consume explaining those points. So, talking about the Indian apex court, in recent past there are more than about 10 such verdicts. If we connect the dots and if we try and interpret these verdicts, we would come out with one conclusion: one, that there are blatant violations of the local laws. And just to give you an example, that there were about more than 10 to 20 cases. People were convicted, the minorities, particularly Muslims, were convicted. Those who had done made derogatory remarks against the temples and against their bodies. Now, but not a single Hindu, or not a single, let's say, BJP member or RSS member was ever, because there are good Hindus also, were ever convicted. So your question, fundamental question, can we question not only we, it could be entire international community. They can question by quoting them that law. The recent one was the United States report on the religious freedom, and even the statement of the Secretary of State Blinken on this count. So all these, but diplomacy is a multi-dimensional, multi-layer, and it can only be achieved with consistency and continuity. What we talk on these
and I understand your point, Dr. Jameel. I understand. But Dr. Jameel, when we look at this situation, of course, it calls for a lot of urgent action. And when we're talking about 2019, I remember there was this clock that was put up in the federal capital marking the number of hours and days that have passed by, and we're sitting 3 years past that, and that's all that's happening. There hasn't really been much that has been done against the kind of action that have been taken. And when we talk about what is going on while we sit and talk, of course, there are people who are suffering. There are people not just in occupied Kashmir, but also within India, both part of other minorities and the Muslim population as well. You earlier talked about consistent diplomacy and the different forms of diplomacy that can be taken. Can you perhaps elaborate on those? Are there certain avenues that you think are not being explored enough?
Let me explain that also, but my thoughts are triggered by hearing Farooq Fatafisa, and those are about 370. That would give you a full idea about the apex court of India. Now, Article 370, once it was challenged. Now, first of all, it had the protection of Constitution, and Constitution, once they amended that, or once they brought the bill, that bill could not have been brought in the at the first place, because unless it was approved by the Kashmir Assembly, it could not be. So Kashmir Constituent Assembly, and if since that was not existing at that time, there was a governor's rule. So they got the ordinance from the governor and presented. So ipso facto, that could not have been even maintained. What to talk of, its proceedings and then finally its verdict. And if any jurist of the world, if they examine that within their own parameter of law, it's now coming back to your point. Now, yes, it's not only one. As I said, that there are different forms of diplomacy, and one is the legal diplomacy, which, because since it's a court verdict, and the international fora, all multilateral fora, they respect the court verdict. Unless it blatantly goes against certain international laws, in that case, there are certain frameworks they try and invoke that. And how it is done. First of all, one has to establish that it is a violation of their own constitution and of their own law, and the transparent and the trial had not taken place in the very light of what is happening in India. For example, I'll give you just about 4 or 5 examples of it. One is the one which we are discussing, the verdict yesterday of Supreme Court. Have you ever heard the Supreme Court gives the en bloc verdict that demolition, the government, not stopping the government to do the demolition of the minorities, the houses, the Muslim houses in particular.
Right.
And then in past, even the mosques, those 5,000 mosques which were constructed by the Muslim rulers in India, the apex court once had given a rule that the mosque is not the only place where the Muslims can pray, and words to that effect. Then the ban on wearing the hijab, which had triggered some kind of retaliation by Muslim world, but then it calmed down. Even
Absolutely.
the
Yes, thank you very much, Dr.
would you
Jamila.